Hello everyone, Brian Kibler here, and I wanted to talk a little bit today about the cards that have been revealed so far for the new set Whispers of the Old Gods. Now, I've kind of fallen behind a little bit because I was just away for commentary for the various Hearthstone Championship Tour events, but I want to sort of catch up so I can go over the cards that have been revealed since the initial announcement for the set. So I want to start off with the Forbidden cards. Forbidden Flame, Forbidden Healing, and Forbidden Shaping. I'm starting with these because these are a group of cards I've heard people talk quite a bit about, and they're kind of a strange class of cards for Hearthstone. They're likened in many cases to X spells for Magic the Gathering, cards like Fireball, Disintegrate, things like that. The weird thing in Hearthstone compared to Magic in terms of how mana works is that in Hearthstone you're guaranteed a mana crystal every turn, and in Magic you only get mana when you draw cards that produce mana from your deck. And also in Hearthstone there's a cap of 10 mana, whereas in Magic there's no cap. It's just whatever cards you have that produce mana continues to give you that mana throughout the course of the game. This makes spells that allow you to spend all of your mana very, very different, because in Hearthstone these spells are constrained by sort of normal mana curve issues. When you play Forbidden Shaping, you're going to play it to get something that you would normally get at that point in the game no matter what. And Forbidden Shaping, you spend all your mana, you summon a random minion that costs that much. So if you play Forbidden Shaping at 2, it's generally going to be worse than playing a minion that you've chosen to put in your deck that costs 2 mana, because the average minion is worse than one that you might select for your deck itself. So you get flexibility from Forbidden Shaping because it gives you the option to play it at any point in the curve. And that makes, I think, specifically Forbidden Shaping possibly relatively powerful. I don't know that it's necessarily going to be a card that goes into a significant number of competitive priest decks. Probably not, simply because random effects like that can be pretty unreliable. There's lots of cards that will have some of their cost sunk into a battle cry effect, for instance, which you would not get from Forbidden Shaping because the card isn't actually played from your hand. So the problem comparing Forbidden Shaping to a Magic X spell is the fact that there is that cap, that 10 mana cap on on Hearthstone mana compared to Magic. Because in Magic, X spells are particularly powerful not only because they provide you with versatility throughout the game, but because often in a game of Magic it will go on longer than you've sort of built your deck to structurally function in. You'll maybe get 10 land in play, or 15 land in play, and suddenly now you can cast Fireball or Disintegrate for a huge number. So the functionality of this kind of use all of your mana effect is very different because of the cap that does exist in Hearthstone. So while I think that Forbidden Shaping may be a card that ends up in some fun, Randuin win decks or whatever, I would be surprised to see it really played very much competitively, simply because the random outcome is probably not worth the versatility that you gain from it. Similarly, Forbidden Flame and Forbidden Healing spend all your mana, deal twice that much to a minion, spend all your mana, restore health for twice that much. Those are cards that aren't really efficient at any point that you'd cast them. And you have options at any point that you could choose. Simply, okay, well, I want to play Flame Cannon, I want to play Holy Light. You have to get to these very high points on the curve before you're really outdoing existing spells that you could choose to intentionally play. If these cards do see play, I expect that it will be more due to the fact that they can be cast as 0 and 1 mana spells with things like Flamewaker or Gadgetzan Auctioneer and the like, rather than simply because people are looking to generate their effect. Because I think that you'd rather have something which is reliable and which is more efficient, which is what you'd get from playing any normal spell rather than these sort of variable cost spells. So this, as a group, I would be somewhat surprised to see these showing up regularly in competitive decks, but they certainly have some synergies because of the fact that they are these variable cost spells that may cause them to show up more. Next, I want to talk about Tentacles Forearms. So this is a card that got a lot of flack when it was first introduced. Sho actually revealed this on his stream not long ago, and people's reaction to this was overwhelmingly negative. I even saw people suggesting that, oh, Blizzard has no idea what they're doing. This is a card, like, it's too bad. It's a 5 cost weapon that only has 2 attack. But the thing is, it's just being, I think, evaluated completely wrong. This is not an efficient weapon. This is a weapon that can never go away. This is very, very similar to something like Shadow Form, which gives your hero the ability to generate pretty much infinite value throughout the rest of the game, because you've now generated this thing which your opponent cannot remove, which can continuously allow you to attack into minions, attack into your opponent every single turn. So clearly this isn't a card that it compares to Fiery War Axe or Deathspite or Arcanite Reaper in terms of efficiency, and it shouldn't, frankly. Some people say, oh, this should cost 3 mana, this should cost 4 mana, this should have 3 power. It's like all of those things would make this vastly more efficient, but really the goal of this card isn't efficiency. The goal of this card is sacrificing efficiency. Clearly a 5 cost weapon that has 2 attack is not an efficient weapon, but it allows you to just continuously generate value, and frankly infinite value over the course of a game, because you can just keep using it to remove minions and to attack your opponent. Obviously you do have to keep replaying it, but there are a lot of games where a deck like Control Warrior will go many turns without necessarily spending all of its mana, and sometimes you'll literally just press Armor Up or Tank Up and say go. And if you're able to just keep attacking minions, attacking your opponent with Tentacles Forearms, that gives you a way to get value out of those empty turns. You see a lot of times in warrior games, that you'll be sitting with several weapons in your hand, or you'll just go through a bunch of weapons over the course of the game. And this, it allows you to just keep doing that, not have those dead turns. I don't expect this to be a staple in warrior decks by any means, but I do think that if there are warrior decks that are aimed at going long, very heavily control biased warrior decks, or warrior decks in a metagame that is slower than we've generally come to know, I think this could be a very, very powerful card. And not only does it provide this infinite value, but there's nothing your opponent can do about it. It's not if this, you lose the last charge of durability, return this to your hand. Even if they have Harrison Jones, even if they have Acidic Swamp Ooze, they can't kill your Tentacles Forearms. So it's going to be around forever. And that's a big deal. So it's kind of like a Shadow Form that's less efficient mana-wise, because you do have to keep replaying it, but you get to keep your hero power as well. And that combination, in the right circumstances, is extremely powerful. Next, I want to talk about Doom. So this is a card that I think is really powerful, that's in completely the wrong class. The problem is that Warlock is actually the class that already has the best mass removal. We have Twisting Nether, we have Shadow Flame, we have Hellfire, and it also already has the best card draw, because it has Life Tap. So this is a card that in many cases in a Warlock deck will just lead to you overdrawing or fatiguing yourself out for an effect that you generally don't really need. Like, maybe this is a card that somehow sees play in a sort of mid-range control heavy metagame, where you really want to draw these extra cards to assemble some sort of combo, but aren't really at risk of overdrawing and are emptying your hand out. Like, in an average game, maybe there's 5 minions in play, 4 minions in play when you cast this. Unless you've largely emptied your hand, you are risking overdrawing as a controlling Warlock deck. And if you are playing a Warlock deck that is looking to assemble some sort of combo to win the game, that's dangerous, because if you miss one of your parts, if you burn one of your parts, that can be a big problem. Plus, digging yourself that close to fatigue in a lot of matchups can also be a big issue, in many of those matchups being the ones in which you'd actually get to 10 mana. So I'd love to see a card like this in, say, Priest, because I think that's a class that really both needs this sort of effect and could benefit much more from this sort of effect than Warlock can. But I understand that thematically these are both effects that are tied very heavily to the Warlock class in Hearthstone. it just unfortunately means that I think that this card is very unlikely to see much competitive play. Next, I want to talk about Renounce Darkness. So this is a card that is hilarious to me in a number of ways. One is that it was revealed by Forsen, and it is, giving up your evil ways, which kind of hilarious to me. I've seen various comments on this particular card as far as how strong people think it will be. The problem is that the fact that you get this cost reduction on all your sort of future cards. The problem is that they're random cards, and there are very few sets of class cards that are going to be very synergistic if you don't choose them yourself. So you also can't control the class that you transform into with this, which means that you could end up with a class that doesn't work with a hero power, that doesn't work with the rest of your minions in your deck. You could end up with a bunch of spells that don't necessarily synergize together. I mean, you could turn into a hunter, get a bunch of call pets and stable masters and not beasts and whatever else. It just, I don't know. It's definitely an interesting card and a fun card, and I'm sure I'm going to play with it a lot because it'll certainly make for great stream content. But I doubt that this is a card we're going to see a tremendous amount of in competitive play. All right, next I want to talk about Faceless Shambler. This is a card kind of like Faceless Manipulator, but it is reduced in cost by 1, and rather than giving you the body of the original creature with its abilities, it gives you the body of the original creature and has taunt. So this is a pretty interesting card in a number of ways. It can certainly be utilized in decks that previously would use things like Ancient Watcher, which has kind of fallen out of favor. The problem being, of course, that if this is used on something with a big body like an Ancient Watcher or whatever else that maybe has a drawback, it makes your Faceless Shambler, of course, very vulnerable to silence effects. If we don't see a change to Ironbeak Owl, and we do see lots of Ironbeak Owls, or we see lots of Earth Shocks, those sort of cards, this card is very, very vulnerable. And it's also a card that is inherently by itself just not very powerful. You need to have a board presence to play this, and needing to have a board presence to play your taunt like this, that isn't necessarily something like Defender of Argus, which helps bolster your board presence and lead to you having the ability to fight your opponent's board immediately, I think can be somewhat troubled. So it's an interesting card. It could potentially see some play in some decks that are specifically looking to kind of abuse undercosted, overstated minions like the Ancient Watcher. But I would be surprised if this did become a common competitive card. All right, let's talk about Giant Sandworm. This is a hunter beast. Whenever it attacks a minion and kills it, it can attack again. So cool mechanic. I think this is definitely something that is that's neat to see. The problem being, of course, that this is an 8-cost minion that dies to Big Game Hunter that does nothing the turn you play it. So this is clearly a powerful card if you get to the point that you get to attack with it, because it can potentially mow down multiple taunts and hit your opponent in the face, and that's awesome. And it is a beast, so it can potentially come off of something like a Web Spinner or a Ram Wrangler. So who knows? Those are some pretty powerful options for both of those. But the biggest issue is just cost versus vulnerability and what you get from it right away. Obviously, if this minion had charge, it'd be great, but that's true of any minion, really. But I do think that the effectiveness of a late game card like this has to be taken into account always in terms of its vulnerability to specifically Big Game Hunter. A Hunter deck is unlikely to have many targets for Big Game Hunter in many cases, so maybe your opponents end up playing out their Big Game Hunters early, but maybe also they just change Big Game Hunter, and cards like this get to have more of an opportunity to shine. But right now, I'd be surprised to see Giant Sandworm showing up too much, particularly when you could play something like a Ragnaros at this spot, which is exactly the same cost and stat line, but has an immediate effect when you play it at the very least. So cool card, but probably not going to be showing up too often. Speaking of cool hunter cards, we have Infest. This is a card that we revealed on the broadcast for the Asia Pacific Championship, and I think it's a pretty interesting card. It's very powerful in a deck where you're able to get a lot of minions in play. If you think about it as effectively draw a card for each minion you control. It's kind of what it says, except it doesn't contribute to drawing deeper into your deck because you don't actually draw cards. You're getting random beasts, but value-wise, you're getting a card for every minion you have in play once those minions die. And it isn't something like Cult Master, where you have to get those things killed now, or else your opponent will kill the Cult Master and you won't get those card draws. So something like Unleash the Hounds with Infest is clearly powerful in that you can immediately generate a ton of value and have this big sort of swing in terms of your resources that you have available to you. Obviously, a random beast is probably going to be worse than a card in your deck, so you're getting a little bit less value than draw a card, but also it doesn't get you closer to fatigue and can give you sort of this wide range of things you might not necessarily be putting in your deck, like a giant sandworm. If you do go late, you have the opportunity to actually pick up these things, which can give you a lot of boost there. So if you are going to play a mid-range or controlling style of hunter deck, I think that this is potentially a strong option. Obviously goes very well with Unleash specifically, as well as with anything that does generate multiple minions, or just naturally making a big board presence through other means. So I do think this card has a lot of potential. Not a Smork face get 'em Smork card, which is great because I think that it will be nice to see more tools for hunters to play different styles of decks. Eater of Secrets, the new Kizan Mystic, which I know everyone always pronounces Kezan Mystic, but I'm just going to keep pronouncing it Kizan, in part because it tilts people. But also that's just how I always naturally pronounced it. But Eater of Secrets, obviously a card we would have loved to have in our repertoire to face Secret Paladin decks before so much of the core of Secret Paladin will be leaving in Standard. But I do think Eater of Secrets is a good safety valve to exist in Hearthstone because it does enable any class to be able to deal with opposing secrets. It comes at a very high cost, because having a 4-cost 2/4 base minion in your deck is something that's going to be very, very bad in matchups where you're not actually playing against secret decks. But the swinginess of, okay, your opponent does have secrets, and maybe they just played a Mysterious Challenger, you ate 4 secrets, now you have a 6/8 minion, and all your opponent's secrets are gone. That's a huge, huge tempo swing and value swing. So obviously this is a card that can fit a role in the metagame. I do think that we're going to see things like this in various forms in every few sets now that Blizzard is working on a sort of standard rotation policy, because they want to guarantee that there are the same sorts of effects in Standard at any time. And I think that if they were to do that, that would be a pretty big mistake, because I think that the importance of set rotation is that things change. But there are certain categories of effects that you want to have interactivity with that the game engine doesn't necessarily do that as a baseline. And Secrets are one of those types of cards. So I like Eater of Secrets, and I expect that it will see competitive play in an environment where decks with a lot of secrets are popular. I want to talk about Undercity Huckster. So this is a pretty cool card. This is obviously a 2/2 for 2, not great value. But Death Rattle of half a Burgle is pretty good. This guy dies, draws you a card. And that's, he draws you a class card, which is a more powerful card on average than a neutral card. So you're getting a pretty good return from this minion. And it's interesting because it is a 2-drop Death Rattle minion. So we're going to see most of the good 2-drop Death Rattle minions leaving with Naxxramas. We're losing Haunted Creeper, we're losing Nerubian Egg. That's a big deal. But Undercity Huckster can potentially help try to enable a Unearthed Raptor deck, which I've been playing a lot of Raptor Rogue recently. I think it's a pretty fun deck, not necessarily top tier competitive, but it is a deck that I was able to pilot almost exclusively to Legend this past season, So certainly a deck that at least right now has tools to be effective. I don't think this is nearly as powerful as Nerubian Egg when you copy the Death Rattle effect, but it does give you some ways to use that card, and I think that's something that we're going to see also some of as we do move forward with the standard format, because there will be cards that are kind of backwards compatible, like the Unearthed Raptor. Didn't really work with much in the same set as it, but obviously was great with Naxxramas cards. And I think that we will see the design team for Hearthstone adding cards that sort of fill those holes for those cards moving forward. So cool card, and potentially can lead to a sort of value-oriented rogue deck, not necessarily strictly tempo.